was a hot summer day and I needed a breather. So one day, as we drove along the paved roads next to the sandy beaches of California, we came to a halt when we found a pretty deserted spot. There was, however, a resort further down the beach and a few evenly distanced cottage homes where we occasionally saw old couples wandering about on their verandas. And so, we parked nearby and put down our bags on one of the nipa hut cottages that were free for the public to use. So, after swimming for some time, I went back to shore. Moments later, I heard someone whistle. Taking a sidelong glance, I noticed two charming young ladies who seemed to be around my age. They appeared to be waving at someone. So, I looked behind me to see their companions, but nobody else was there. That's when one of the girls caught my attention and said,
"Hey you! Mind if we join you?"
Staring at their physique, I couldn't help but blush as they came closer. The girls must have noticed because they giggled as I averted my gaze. Sooner or later, Leo came to shore, approached me and said, "Wow, Ethan, you never told me we'd have such gorgeous company. Would you like to introduce them?" I scratched my head as my mind went blank and replied, "Well, this is,
Actually, we just met. Hi, I'm Sandra."
Pointing to her friend next to her, she added,
"And this is Courtney."
Leo was pleased. "It's nice to meet you. So, what are you two lovely young ladies doing on a deserted part of this beach?" Sandra tilted her head and replied,
"Well, I'd like to ask you the same thing, mister."
"Oh, where are my manners? I'm Leo, and this is..." Before he had a chance to finish, Courtney said,
"Ethan, you called him by his name earlier. Cute name, by the way."
After getting acquainted with one another, we put on our clothes and offered the ladies some drinks. Aside from beer, Leo surprisingly brought a bottle of vodka and sunset rum. Courtney was a hard drinker. Her friend attempted to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. As we sang and danced to the tunes of Paramore on Spotify, I marveled at the full moon illuminating the skies, shedding dim light upon the shores of California. We were all tipsy at this point, lying on the sand, but Courtney was still zealous and full of energy. She was on her next shot when she suggested,
"Oh, I know. Why don't we all go skinny dipping? Wouldn't that be fun? Woo!"
However, the rest of us were so exhausted that we amiably declined the offer. She frowned and pouted like a child, saying,
"Fine, I'll go by myself."
She began to strip off her swimwear, heading for the water. Then, for a moment, she glanced at me and said,
"And oh, if you ever change your mind, I'll be waiting."
Moments later, Sandra tries calling her name, asking her to return to shore, but to our dismay, we were only greeted by the sounds of waves splashing and winds howling as the night grew colder. We all stood up, approaching the water as Sandra hollered,
"Courtney! Hey, this isn't funny. You hear me? Say something!"
After a while, there was still no response. Leo and I looked at each other, feeling anxious. This was an indication that something could be terribly wrong, and since we were the only people there, we had to act quickly. As Leo and I began descending into the water, we heard a frantic scream coming from a distance. It was Courtney, and she sounded like she was in trouble. So, we followed the direction of her voice and raced towards her. After 10 grueling minutes of searching in the dark, we finally found her and brought her back to shore. Her body was now stiff, and her skin complexion went from glowing white to pale blue. I gasped, realizing that she was no longer breathing, her pupils fully dilated. This beguiling young lady, who moments ago was flirting with me, had just drowned and was now dead. Nonetheless, I tried to give her CPR, aware that the brain may have had 7 minutes before completely shutting down. However, despite my best efforts, there was no sign of life. Panicking, Sandra said,
"What the hell? We should have just called 911!
She went for her phone and started dialing when Leo replied, "No, not yet! Don't make the call, you hear me? Just wait a minute!" Bawling her eyes out, Sandra hollered,
"We don't have a minute, Leo! Gosh, what's wrong with you?"
"Just trust me! We'll think of something," Leo said, not sounding very persuasive. Then, Leo turned to me, gripped my arm, and told me, "If she calls the cops, we'll go to jail for public intoxication and possible manslaughter, Ethan. We can't let that happen." Distressed, I replied, "What do you suggest we do, wise guy? We've done everything we could, okay?" Suddenly, the look on Leo's face changed into something more sinister. Then he said, "No, Ethan, not everything." I was so afraid to ask, but I had to. "What do you mean, Leo? We have to get rid of them," he replied, his posture showing clear signs of resolve. "Don't be foolish, Leo. We're talking about killing someone here. I think it's better that we call the police." I slapped him on the cheek, hoping he'd come back to his senses. However, Leo did the complete opposite. He scampered towards Sandra, pushing her to the ground, and began bashing her head with a rock. I watched in horror as Sandra screamed for help, her legs wriggling in pain. However, I just stood there, my mind hazy. Leo's eyes were full of bloodlust. He didn't stop until her body ceased to move. When the deed was done, Leo pulled my arm and demanded that I help him drag the bodies to the water to eradicate the evidence. It was past midnight and we drove off as if nothing had happened in silence. However, the bloodstains on our clothes were a stark reminder of the day I assisted in the act of murder. Following this traumatic event, I never set foot on the beach ever again. Despite however much I want it to be just a nightmare, the things that happened that day are unfortunately very real. The memories of what I saw haunt me even now, almost a decade on. You just can't forget something like that. No matter how many thousands of dollars you spend in therapy, nor how many nights you spend getting to the bottom of the bottle. Believe me, I've tried everything. But all it seems to do is wash away everything but the dreadfully crystal clear memory of what I saw on that day. It was a beautiful day, chock full of sunshine, a perfect day for the beach. Chances are almost every Australian in the country was either already at the shore or itching to get there. On that particular day, it was more crowded than usual. Still enough space for everyone to enjoy themselves, though. Plenty of sunbathing babes and their beer-chugging boyfriends, if they had them. Quite a handful of young families and their retiree grandparents, and many, many surfers out on the water, catching the plentiful waves rolling on through and crashing ashore. Truly, it was an unbeatable summer day. I couldn't resist getting into the water myself, of course, and even though I used to surf on occasion back then, I had a special toy to play with that day that I had recently just purchased. I'd never ridden a jet ski before, so I took it out past the surf and practiced the handling in the flatter waters for a little while. I remember somehow getting out of breath from the sheer exhilaration of it, and taking a moment out past the waves to myself to drift with the natural current of the water. But in any case, being that far from the shore and watching all the little people go about their leisure, it was an unmatched moment of serenity, with not a single sound but the gentle wind and the distant crashing of waves. Out of nowhere, the peace was shattered into a million hopeless pieces. The sound of a man's scream was distant, but traveled more than well enough across the water to seem terrifyingly close. All the people on the beach stopped and turned their heads out to sea. I scanned the crowd of surfers, and within a moment, I saw it. The man, being plunged and dragged below the water, still tied by the wrist to his surfboard, which flailed disturbingly as it tried to remain buoyant. All around him, and growing fast, a zone of crimson which sent chills down my spine. I immediately started up the jet ski and raced to him full throttle. The surfers were all rushing to shore, abandoning the man to his fate. I got to take my jumps on the waves, but there was absolutely no joy in it whatsoever. When I got there, the man was clinging to his surfboard, crying out for a savior. "Help me, please! There's a shark! Take my hand! Climb on and I'll take you to shore!" Frantically, he reached out and grabbed onto my outstretched hand. His was drenched in blood and gripped mine like a vice. But as I tried to pull him up onto the back of the jet ski, struggling with the lack of space and balance to get him on board, I saw the shark circling behind its prey in the murky cloud of bloody water surrounding us, just a few feet away. It was, without a doubt, a great white, and it had to be over 15 feet long, more than dwarfing my jet ski, which was puny in comparison. But it was not circling out of curiosity. It had not just taken a bite to get a taste. It was feeding. Just when I thought it had disappeared, it thrashed out of the water and took the surfer into its mouth at the waist. The scream he let out was indescribable. "Ah! Help me, please! Help!" The shark pulled at the man, trying to drag him down into the depths, but I resisted. The jet ski tipped to one side, and the man's head was almost beneath the water, his eyes locked onto me, his face in the most absolute agony possible. And just when I thought our grip was about to fail, he was released from the shark's grasp. The jet ski recoiled and rocked back, and the man flew up out of the water. But that's when I saw what had really happened. His legs were gone. He was nothing more than a torso now, and all the blood within him spewed out from his waist and tainted the water around us. And just as quickly, I watched the life leave his eyes, still locked onto mine. His grip on my hand waned until it had totally gone limp, and I knew in that moment that he had probably just died right before my eyes. Still, I wanted to do whatever I could, so I continued to try to get what was left of his body onto the back of the jet ski. Everything was wet with blood and water and hopelessly slippery, and my eyes were welling up with tears despite my best efforts to maintain my composure. The shock was getting to me. I was alone in the ocean at that point, with every possible person that might have been able to help me watching from the safety of the shore. But the shark wasn't done. It may have taken the man's legs and swallowed them in a single bite, but it was still hungry, and it wanted the rest. And I was in its way. It circled back around and ran into me. I felt the rough scaliness of its hide upon my leg, at the same time as the sickening sensation of the jet ski nearly capsizing from the force of the shark's move of intimidation. One side of my body dipped into the bloody water, and there, just below the surface, only a few inches away from my face, was the mouth of the shark, reaching in for another bite. Without thinking, I let go of the man's body and punched the jet ski into full throttle, racing it to shore. If ever in my life there was something I wanted to go back and change, I would regret that moment right there, when I, too, abandoned that man to the jaws of the great white. Every night before I sleep, if I manage to at all, I see the man's face frozen in fear, slipping into the depths as I rode away into safety without him. And of course, getting through the pandemonium of crying children and screaming, grieving women, there were more of a different breed of sharks waiting for me, the reporters. I hadn't even had a moment to breathe and collect myself before they were in my face, pointing cameras and microphones at me, berating me with 1,000 heartless questions. It was all I could do to not burst into tears on national television. It's been about 8 or 9 years since then, and this has been the first time I've actually been able to tell the whole story without shutting down. The only thing I want to say now is to that man's family that I'm so terribly sorry, and that I did everything I could without getting killed myself. But even then, if I could go back, I'd trade my life for his.
I used to think that lifeguarding was the perfect gig for me. I've always felt at home at the beach, and helping people has long been a natural instinct of mine. It's easy work, and the certification process for becoming a lifeguard is leagues easier than something like medical school. And let me be clear, The job comes with many perks. I get to live by the beach like I've always wanted to, and I get paid to watch the waves all day, which is what I would want to be doing every day of my life anyway. Of course, there is some responsibility with it as well. Every once in a while I have to deal with a panicking drowning swimmer or a minor shark bite or a jellyfish sting, but that's not even the worst part of the job. That's the kind of stuff I expected to deal with. What I didn't expect to deal with was the men, the old creepy men. I don't know how, but in all the days of my life I've spent at the beach, I never really noticed just how many nasty creeps prowl on the ocean shore just about every day. Don't get me wrong, I always knew they were out there, deep down, and I always knew they were stealing glances and staring through their sunglasses, but it never bothered me, as long as they kept their distance. Now that I'm at the beach alone every day, the advances I have to curb are far more numerous than they've ever been. And what makes it worse is being on the lifeguard tower. It's about 10 feet off the ground with no cover except a big umbrella. It's designed to give me full visibility of my assigned stretch of beach, but the side effect of the design is that I'm basically on display for whoever wants to stare at me, at whatever part of me, and for however long they please. And of course, I can't just leave because I have a job to do. And unfortunately, I don't have the authority to kick anybody off the beach without calling the cops. The worst offender by far is a guy I don't even know the name of. I just call him Herbert. He comes out every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday without fail. He never gets in the water and he never lays down an umbrella or anything like that. All he does is sit in the sand right next to my tower and stare at all the girls in bikinis through his ridiculously wide sunglasses. And the worst part is, he's only one worn out Speedo from being totally He comes to the beach with clothes on, but when he gets to a spot next to me, he strips down to his freakishly slim banana hammock, revealing his god-awful leathery hide, all the while staring at me. He pretends to be suntanning, but it's disgustingly obvious that he's been doing this sort of thing his whole life, because his entire body is more deeply bronzed than Patrick was in that one episode of SpongeBob. He's old enough to be my great-grandpa, too, with so many wrinkles and callous crevices all over his body that make him look like he used to weigh 400 pounds, lost 200, then gained back another 50. But of course, old creeps like him are never self-aware, even when they're creeping on girls that could be in middle school. I tried to be nice when he talked to me, though, which was often. Unfortunately, all he did was take advantage of that kindness.
It's really no wonder they made you the lifeguard. You sure are the crown jewel of this beach. Do you ever think you'll come down and associate with the common folk?
Putting me on a pedestal isn't gonna get you anywhere, Herbert, but you can keep trying.
I'm not putting you on a pedestal, darling. I'm trying to get you down from the one you're on so I can get somebody to rub some lotion on this old body of mine.
And why would I do that?
Because I'm a frail old man who hasn't been able to do it myself for at least 20 years. I mean, look at me. Do I look like I need any more sun damage? Won't you help an old man?
All right, you old fart, but I really hope somebody starts drowning in the middle of it.
Reluctantly, I climbed down from the tower and accepted the bottle of suntanning lotion he handed me. I honestly can't believe the things I do out of kindness. He rolled over onto his stomach and I started on his back. As bad as his skin looked, it felt even worse. It was like his whole body was covered in low-grit sandpaper. Even though I was disgusted with myself and terrified that other people around us might see me doing it, I put on a strong face and did the deed.
Your back is all good now, Herbert. You're welcome.
Wait a second. Will you get my chest as well?
Fine.
His chest was covered in a thick mat of tangled body hair, all full of lint and crusted sweat and salt water. I couldn't bear to lather in it too much, so I stopped before I got too near the bulge in his Speedo.
That's good, darling. Thank you very much. You can get the rest in the bedroom later.
Not a chance. Not one lonely little chance in the world. Behave yourself, Herbert.
The following weekend, after realizing he could play on my natural instincts to help people, he was a lot more pushy.
I've been working on my backstroke. Want to see?
He didn't even wait for me to say no. He just ran straight into the high tide and started flopping around like a fish. At first, I thought his backstroke form was terrible, but after a minute or so, I realized he wasn't even swimming. He looked like he was genuinely struggling to stay above the water. I recognized the ineffectual splashing and choke cries for help from the training. He was drowning. I stood up and blew my whistle, grabbed my flotation device, and jumped from the tower, running into the water and making a beeline for the old man. By the time I got to him, he was floating face down and motionless, which made it terrifically easy to wade him ashore. There, in the sand, I performed immediate life support while shouting for a bystander to call an ambulance. His heart was still beating, but he wasn't breathing. Not unusual for drowning victims, as their lungs are usually full of water. I heaved him up to try to perform the Heimlich maneuver, but he was too fat and heavy for me to do it effectively. So reluctantly, I resorted to mouth. His lips were dry and cracked, and his breath tasted like milk and cigarettes. After about the 10th breath of life, I started to lose hope a little bit. But that's when the true nature of this event was revealed to me. I felt him stirring as though he was regaining consciousness. But then his tongue started moving. He grabbed my face and started swirling his tongue inside my mouth. That's when I punched him in the gut to get him to release me, then slapped him across the face and left him lying there in the sand. He was all smiles and giggles after that, like he'd just achieved some great feat or something. Thankfully, all the bystanders that had been caught up in the excitement quickly realized what was going on and started muttering and cursing him out for me. Herbert, however, was unfazed. The very next day, he tried the same trick.
My backstroke didn't go so well, did it? Well, I guess I'll try the breaststroke this time.
I watched him run off gleefully, fully in the mindset that if he started to fake drown again, I was going to let him die and make a fool of himself. And sure enough, within a minute, he started flopping around like a fish out of water once again. This time, he looked like he was really trying to give off a convincing performance. Almost everybody on the beach at the time was part of the same crowd from the day before. Some of them gave me expectant looks, but I just shook my head. Eventually, old Mr. Herbert stopped moving and started floating face down again. But he never came to. He never gave up the act and blushed with embarrassment. And he never learned his lesson. A little while later, he washed up on shore like a beached whale, unconscious. He really must have been quite discouraged because nobody did a thing besides move their spots a little farther down the beach. It was a good day chilling in the sun and watching his body bloat and get carried out to sea in the receding tide. I must say, my day-to-day experience as a lifeguard has improved immensely after old Mr. Herbert's disappearance.
I'm trying to get you down from the one you're on so I can get somebody to rub some lotion on this old body of mine.
And why would I do that?
Because I'm a frail old man who hasn't been able to do it myself for at least 20 years. I mean, look at me. Do I look like I need any more sun damage? Won't you help an old man?